as I look to my left today.
Thank you, Madam President. The clerk started out the debate today by referring to an insane amount of amendments on the docket. I don't think all of them will be called, but I think there is a direct relationship between the number of amendments that have been filed on this underlying bill, or now the amendment that was just introduced about an hour ago, a direct relationship to the number of individuals and entities testifying against this bill. Yes, there were some that testified in favor, but if you check on the CGA website to see the number of testimonials, you'll see, I think, what has to be a record number of testimonials. And many of those, the vast majority of them, as far as I can tell, were speaking out in opposition to this bill. Today, it strikes me that there is a lack of communication between the two chambers and the executive branch, because if I remember correctly, a couple of months ago, the governor said that the state of Connecticut is indeed open for business. That, to me, as someone who cares deeply about economic development, because that is what creates the greatest value for the citizens, taxpayers, and children of the state of Connecticut, because it's opportunity. It's employment opportunity. It's what keeps state government alive, because it ultimately does generate tax revenues to the state of Connecticut. We could turn around and do good things with those revenues. But this, unfortunately, this bill speaks against being open for business. To me, being open for business is rolling out the red carpet for businesses, for business decision makers, people outside the state of Connecticut who decide at some point they might want to move to Connecticut. They might want to move their operation here for whatever reason. Or just as importantly, if not more importantly, companies and management teams in the state of Connecticut who would like to stay here. They may see a red carpet, but with initiatives like this, I think it's more like a trap door that's been placed in front of them, because when you come to Connecticut, if this bill passes, you'll be paying a lot more, not so much in taxes, not so much in all these other charges and expenses that are the highest in the nation in Connecticut, we all know for a fact, but you now will be paying an additional charge for having employees who will be subject to the benefits of this bill if it goes through, which means it's going to cost 2, 3, 4, as much as 7% to each individual employer going forward. That, to me, is a direct conflict to being open for business. So I wish the communication was a little bit better between the executive branch and the legislature, or vice versa, because we're going two different directions here. And it strikes me in this initiative that it's about as anti-business as you can get. Our system of capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, has worked magnificently well. Again, it has made our country the greatest, most altruistic, most influential country in a positive way in the history of mankind. And that's mainly because what our system does is it lines up the individual interests of employers, managers, anybody who works for a company with the collective whole, provided you have some management input into that and some accountability. And the system works. When you start to regulate, when you start to put in conditions such as paid sick days, you start to strain the system, and you start to take away the magic that you see in the eyes of an entrepreneur or the person who's running a company that's 50 or 75 years old and has a certain culture, but now is being adversely affected by a law, a proposed law here that would change things. It changes the mentality. It drives a wedge, I think, between the employer and the employee. And we're talking about a whole lot of different industries here. And I think we'd all agree that jobs are the panacea. They are the cure-all for our ills. If we could double the number of jobs in the state of Connecticut, what a different state we'd be. We'd have incredible revenue sources. We'd be able to do so much more as a state government, and we wouldn't have to take care of so many people who don't have jobs these days. And I think we'd also all agree that a job is one of the best programs that anybody can be involved in their lifetimes. It gives you a sense of identity. It pays the bills. It allows you to raise a family. It allows you to maybe send your children to UConn and pay in-state or out-of-state tuition because you can actually afford it. We have lost over 100,000 jobs. It's probably even well in excess of 100,000 jobs here over the last 20 years or so in Connecticut. We're a post-industrial, mature, perhaps post-mature economy in the Northeast. We have to be cognizant of that. We have to admit that to ourselves. We have to do everything we can and be as aggressive as we can to recruit new companies and to allow new entrepreneurial ideas to exist and to come to the fore in Connecticut. 4 years ago, a company that I think most of you have all heard of came to visit Connecticut because they were looking for an alternative site to build what's known commonly as the Dreamliner, the Boeing 787. Boeing management came to Connecticut to see if Connecticut would be a great place to build subcomponents for that particular aircraft. It was a short meeting, unfortunately. They looked at the data, they looked at a whole slew of different things that they typically look at, and decided that Connecticut, despite its incredible aerospace heritage, it just wasn't the right place for them, and they ended up in South Carolina. I would argue that we need to, as a state, we need to be number one, not in passing a bill like this. We need to be number one in terms of our competitiveness and in areas that we can indeed be proud of. We need to direct our efforts at creating incentives. Since this is a bill that is purportedly concerned with health care, with not spreading disease and sickness in the workplace, what we should be doing is focusing our efforts on creating incentives to get people well, to be educated about when they're sick, to not go to work. The system works. We've talked to so many people in private industry, whether it's the restaurant business or any other service-oriented industry, and managers will tell you they have a system that works. And in many cases, it's not the management system or management approach to dealing with sick employees. It's the employees who work it out amongst themselves. We all know restaurants. We all know healthcare facilities where nurses or workers at the restaurants will work these things out with themselves. Management doesn't even, in many cases, have to worry about that. We're in the business of the fast food, healthy restaurant industry, and we have about 380 employees, and there hasn't been one issue with trying to and successfully covering someone who was out sick, and that's during some pretty bad, this is over the last 6 years, going through some pretty bad flu periods, and a period when there was one influenza that looked as though this was going to be unstoppable. But you work it out. Management sets up the guidelines, and the employees work it out. And incidentally, the bulk of those restaurants are in New York City. Some are in Washington, D.C. And we've looked at Connecticut, and that's even before looking at a piece of legislation, proposed legislation before us. And unfortunately, the decision for right now is we cannot come to Connecticut. We know what the taxes are as of a couple of weeks ago. We know what the new taxes are. And it's not just corporate taxes, it's income taxes, it's taxes that hit you in so many different areas. We don't know what the genuine healthcare costs are going to be in the state of Connecticut. We don't know whether a captive audience bill is going to be passed in the state or not, but we do know that if it is, we will not have the flexibility of being able to put together a group of employees and talk about anything but the pure operational aspect of putting together quickly a very healthy meal for people who come to the restaurants. There's too much uncertainty, and we need to look at that. We need to figure out here in Connecticut why we've lost so many jobs and why people are not banging our doors down and beating a path to us. We've seen a lot of companies here just in the last couple of days decide to cut their ties with Connecticut, Overstock.com and PetSmart.com and a variety of others. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg. I really am afraid that we're going to see more and more of this. And we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen numerous companies declare publicly that they're not going to make their $4.5 million investment, which would employ an additional 200 people in the state of Connecticut. If we leave these decisions to the private enterprises that live and breathe this every day for 10, 14, 16 hours, they're going to come up with a solution that works. A mandated one is dictatorial. It's one that says we're not really interested in seeing you succeed your way. What happened to good old American or Yankee capitalism? It seemed to work for over 200 years with all the regulations that we're proposing here or have in place already. We're sending out the wrong message. Incidentally, if you look at 1 or 5 or 10 of the different pieces of testimony, of which there were, I think, hundreds, you'll notice that the Connecticut Restaurant Business Association strongly disagrees with this bill, and they strongly oppose it. So again, let's not drive a wedge between employers and employees, because it's not necessary. It's counterproductive, and it hurts companies at the end of the day, not just financially, but it hurts companies culturally and performance-wise and efficiency-wise. And let's not drive a wedge between the state of Connecticut and the employers who we so desperately need in the state of Connecticut. And thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. President. I think we all have to, once again, do our soul searching and figure out what we're doing here. We're sending out a message in this underlying bill to employers in the state of Connecticut. Currently, we're sending it to employers who might consider coming to Connecticut. There may be a few more out there that do indeed think that Connecticut is still a good place to do business. But when we're essentially inviting the potential abuse of the retaliation procedures that employees can bring through the court system, I think potential employers are going to look at that and say, what is Connecticut thinking, and why is the week, whatever it is, the third week in May, the anti-business week? I know the intentions here are well and good, but we also have to think about what sort of impression we're leaving on decision makers in the business community when they're looking at this. UTC is in the building, I believe, as we speak, and we're down for Industry Day up here on the Capitol for Industry Day. And a good case in point is the plant in East Hartford where they were going to shut it down. The Attorney General and others took this through the judicial system to essentially get a final decision by a judge of a higher court to say, hey, Pratt and Whitney, you can't close the plant for 9 months or a year, whatever the time period was. And that's a very nice victory for for the plaintiff for 9 months. But do you think UTC is thinking we're ever going to do another new investment in the state of Connecticut unless we have to by virtue of federal contracting requirements? Of course they're not going to. So this amendment fixes, to a degree, a bill that I think sends out a very bad message to the business community, and I would urge everybody to vote for this because it is a well thought out one, and Senator McKinney did a great job articulating why it's going to make this bill less bad. Thank you.